Forgot to grab my crystals, so clearing. And I'm gonna hand it off to you, Robbie, for a prayer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Mhm.
at this time, inviting each person to connect into this call, and we invite the presence of the Creator, the presence of God, to join us, the light of the Most High, the love of the Most High, and the power of the Most High to be here with us, so that we may more easily communicate from the heart and the soul, so that each person can receive from the heart and soul, so that regardless of the words spoken, there can be a transmission that is uplifting, loving, and joyful, supporting the lives of others for the better in good and loving ways. May it be so.
Maybe so. All right. So we were just chit chatting and lost track of time behind the scenes. Hi, everybody coming in. So we're starting to talk about today's theme about how to hold our own, be accountable, and be sovereign within relationship, whatever stage we're going into, like when we first met somebody and setting those ground rules, or being in relationship, committed relationship, and how to maintain balance within that, not lose ourselves. So, yeah, that where shall I start? I was starting to get into the conversation and then remembered we should bring it out here, but I was starting to ask Robbie about the men's groups that he works with, and just kind of getting a understanding of what type of men are drawn to that work. And I was asking, are they in relationships? Are they single? And he said about 50-50. So I'm kind of interested in, even though maybe this isn't a specific focused topic that you go into, what kind of things are you hearing the men in the men's group in your work bringing into focus about where men are at with relationships and that integrity, or what, how would you
Mhm,
word what we're talking about for the
mhm.
men that you're working with?
Yeah, well, I just crunched some numbers, and I'd say that
Right now.
it's probably more of like a 70-30 actually,
Which
of
way?
s- of 70% men that are in relationship.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like I would say majority are in relationship, and in the modern dating world and just relational world, there's a coming and going and an ebb and flow that tends to be in people's lives. So sometimes a man might join in relationship and that relationship may end and they may join a new one or whatnot. So yeah, about a 70-30. And it's one of the core things that draws men to men's circles is relationship, and whether they're in a relationship or they've been in one that's ended. So
Mm,
often a lot of men actually join, like myself and Kirby and many others have joined men's circles because of partners that have been like, you should join a men's circle because you need to grow and like,
mm,
grow into your full self and manhood, because this is, this relationship is not working the way it is. And so often there can be this catalyst from relationship, or the relationship ends and then there's like such despair or loneliness, and there's a need to then have support that is grounded and whatnot. So yeah, the men's circles that I've been a part of, we always encourage as much accountability, responsibility, and integrity as possible, and discernment too. Because something that I've found in relationship is that any conflict takes two people. However, it's not necessarily 50-50. Like, you
mm,
can be with someone who is very emotionally dysregulated, and they're gonna constantly be triggered or projecting or blaming or whatnot upon you, and you may actually be a relatively, like, grounded, centered person, and the conflict might be, like, an 80-20, where, like, 80% is actually this other person's energy and projections and
mm,
karma, and you're actually 20%, and being accountable and responsible is about owning whatever percentage is yours. Or it could be vice versa. You might be having a really bad day and just like totally spew a bunch of crap on your partner. And it's like, yeah, they have their reaction, but that doesn't mean that they need to be responsible for the conflict in the same way that you do, perhaps, because, that's just not respectful behavior. So when I say accountability and responsibility, it's also kind of offering support and guidance on teasing out like, what is mine in this? Where is my
mm.
responsibility? and what is mine to be accountable for?
Yeah, I just caught a really cool, quick question. What is the age range of the men in your circles typically?
I would say like generally about 30 to 50-year-olds.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so that personal accountability, like, what do you think? My kind of burning question that I wonder is, are people too eager to get into relationships, or is there a beautiful mess that happens when we just kind of bumble into things? Do we learn best by not sort of overthinking things and just going by the flow and just, learning through experience and
Mhm,
surrendering to what shows up in our reality and what we resonate with, even if it's short lived or, like, should we be regulating those things more consciously?
mhm,
I sometimes wonder if we'd even have kids if we waited till we were ready to get into relationships, because
mhm,
hormones can be such a big driving factor. And then I sometimes, sorry, a little bit of a tangent, but I also think about life expectancy and how it seems to be climbing. And I heard, within the last 10 years, the first person to live to 300 was born, for instance, and like, with our current intellect, our current spiritual expansion, our our current reproductive years, it feels like we're in transition in so many ways. And you know we're so compelled with chemistry and connecting to people, and then there's all this other stuff that's emerging where we're getting more information sharing about spiritual development and energetic awareness and being able to read energies and our healing and overcoming karma. So there's such this steep learning curve about what is possible. We're not in survival relationships so much anymore, or we have the opportunity to start going into really conscious relationships. How do we know when we're ready? How do people know that it's worth the risk? That's what I keep thinking about lately. When is it right?
mm. Yeah. I feel like one of the things I've noticed is, first of all, in my experience in relationship, there's certain times when there's lessons we can only learn within the container of a relationship, even if those lessons are really challenging and we find ourselves with someone who's a very triggering individual, or not. And there's certain things we can only learn when we're alone, whether that's taking space within a relationship or just taking time to be alone, or being a single individual without relationship. And what I've found is like every single relationship I've been in, I've always learned some really core lessons and cleared some really deep karmic patterns. And
Mhm.
so even though when I look back, I'm like, yeah, that relationship was not like a life partner, obviously, or I would be with them. Because I think for me, there's always been that yearning for someone to walk through life with in a really beautiful, intimate way. And none of those people were that. However, when I look, each one has prepared me, and each one is like a progressive path of awakening of
Yeah,
myself as a man, and also the level of connection that I can call in, and like the deeper love that can be cultivated as it's like it's not like a linear path, but there is this progression that I see in the different relationships I've had. So in that, I feel like they're all really divine and blessed, even though they haven't always been easy.
yeah,
And so I yeah, I don't have a opinion in terms of like, oh, should someone or should they not be jumping into a relationship, because sometimes they just happen to us and there's a certain divine orchestration or like soul contract or something that's going on that we agreed
yeah,
to learn some lessons with this individual. That said, I find most people on the conscious path reach a point where they're like, I'm done with karmic relationships and I'm ready to call in someone who's more balanced for me. And I feel
or
like that's like a hallmark on the path. It doesn't guarantee the next partner is going to be that, but it's like this respect of like I'm not going to keep putting myself in these positions where I just am like heartbroken or disrespected or
yeah,
like abused or whatever it might be. And that begins a prayer of like really deep self-love and a beautiful
yeah.
path of discovery. So, yeah, what comes up for you in that inquiry, and like when you look
Yeah.
at your own life or the lives of those you work with?
I mean, I think the foundation sorry, my dog is drinking water really loudly. I'm not sure if that's distracting. She's thirsty. Anyways, yeah, I feel like I've had consecutive relationships. I think the biggest thing I'm hearing is the pattern recognition, being able to see our own learning curve and to understand that we are the common denominator, and that if we can look at our past relationships and see how we've grown with our own karmic themes and the things that we've been trying to bring more love to in our lives, I think we can be proactive with that. When we can start to spot those patterns, we can be more curious about how are the subconscious drivers for who we're connecting with, reflecting our level of healing or awareness about what we've got going on. The more conscious we can be, the better. Um, we never know what we don't know, so it's hard to ask the right questions. But I think there is some beauty in falling into relationships that find us, that just sort of, become effortlessly. I tend to think that they're um, pretty karmic sometimes, the quickest teachers, like the things that come together really quick before we know what hit us kind of thing, tend to be some of the most beautiful messes because we don't have our wits about us. We just are drawn magnetically, inexplainably into these things, and then we find out, right? And sometimes it's a grand love story, and sometimes it's a repeat, like the apple not falling far from the tree. Like it's a bit of a crapshoot with what we're gonna get. And so I think there is some merit in asking ourselves, like, what is it that we want out of relationship? What, and being very self-aware and accountable with not like the surface level things, like I want this particular car, or I want, this level of income, not so much just the material realm things, but what would be deeply meaningful, who am I as a person, what are my hopes and dreams, my gifts, my talents, that soul level stuff. And truly understanding if I can maintain or experience that within relationship. I think that's a really powerful thing to ask. um, that would kind of allow for people not to get into relationships more just for survival or material realm, like making do, you know um, kind of things. It's like, does this person actually align with my deepest calling or my passions, or what I believe about the world? Um, a lot of that personal accountability. Another thing that came up when you were speaking about the spaciousness and being able to be with ourselves within relationship and on our own, and that we need to find those balance points. I was shown a kind of a vision by my guidance systems about relationships, and we have the too intense, need space, mutually into you, and friend zone. And I've seen this as sort of the seasons of relationship. And so when we're kind of volatile, runner chaser, or there is a lack of clarity about the connection, it can kind of be intense, and it's usually a little bit fear based, or it's sort of come out of nowhere. And then we get the mutual into you kind of thing where it's clicking, and that's that period where we're learning these connections together, and we can only learn those kind of things with this sacred mirror. But the need space and friend zone are two very misunderstood energies from what I've seen. Typically, what I've observed is that when somebody needs space, they know that they have karma to balance, healing, or purpose to step onto. And when someone is friend zoned, typically it's not a rejection or an abandonment, it is a reflection of that person not being aware of the karma they need to clear, the healing they need to do, or the purpose that they need to step onto. Because when we surrender to allowing ourselves to take the space we need, and we can be more conscious about also how we feel a drop in attraction to somebody, we friend zone them. If we were to approach these energies that way, or if we're friend zoned, or that kind of thing. If we had more consciousness about how energy is working there, I feel like there'd be much more harmony in relationships because we'd be aware of the ebb and flow and that it would be nothing personal. So I personally think there needs to be more conversation about the shifting nature of relationship and how it goes through those seasons and the developmental things. From what I can tell, there are those three main areas, which is the karma clearing, the healing, and stepping on purpose. Have you identified those kinds of things in your pursuit of consciousness?
Um, yeah, I haven't like categorized them in those ways. I always like methods of like categorizing and mapping things. It's always helpful. However, yeah, what came through for me in that is getting clear on what you want is really helpful. Like, what are your values? What do you want to create for your own life? Like, having as much clarity on what you want in your life as possible, because then it's easier to align with someone. Because in a connection with someone, the sexual connection is important. However, really, you want this person to be your best friend. You're going to be spending
Mhm.
the majority of your time with them. Depending on how you relate to them, it may be like a significant amount of your life, or it might be half, or whatever. You're going to be spending probably the majority out of anyone else with this human being. They should be your best friend, someone that you love to hang out with. However, you also need to have a sexual connection, or it's just a friendship. However, the sexual connection can also be cultivated and encouraged. There's a certain I found that, like, there's a certain chemistry that is had with certain individuals that, you know, you can stoke more easily. However, if it's just around, like, the pleasure and sensation and sex, then it's really limiting it because that's very dependent on physical health. It's
Yeah.
dependent on hormones, it's dependent on a lot of factors that are out of our control to a certain degree, or ebb and flow. Whereas if your foundation is based on like what you want to create with this person, and like a best friend and someone you love to spend time with, then you can cultivate polarity and intimacy through different practices. That's like the core of it. And that only comes from being really authentic and really real. Because if you're being someone else to try to get something from the person, that and you're not showing up with vulnerability and just being like, "This is where I'm at," and you're playing games, then it's like, if you're someone that wants to, like, be texting them all day, it's like, then just be that person and be honest about it. Don't be like, "Oh, I should stop texting them, I'm being too needy," or whatever. Like, if that's who you are, then just be honest about it, and if that person doesn't like it, then they can be honest about it too, and you can talk about it, and then you can just figure out very early, like, "Oh, I'm someone that needs a lot of energy from my partner," and you're someone that doesn't like that and it annoys you, like, that's probably a
Mhm.
misalignment. Like, so it's like just being honest with what you need, what you want in a relationship.
Yeah, I
Really
find that
important.
that could be a trauma response, right? As a woman, I know whenever I get too wordy, it's because I'm in fear. When I'm at peace, it's pretty zen, but that especially when I was a lot younger and like starting in relationships and trying to find healthy communication, if I was afraid about something, women have like a lot of issues around safety and
Mhm,
security, and it's hard for men to understand how much we're geared in needing that safe container from our masculine counterpart. And so a lot of times we will spiral and need extra before we come into our own peace.
mhm,
We reach for a partner with a lot more effort than is needed rationally when we're not feeling supported in some kind of a way. So that constant messaging can sometimes be an anxiety response. So in a lot of ways, there's healing that needs to happen in those kinds of cases where maybe some self reflection and some, you know, counseling or some kind of work can come in and help balance that out. I find a lot of women, for instance, or feminines who have come out of that are now kind of reluctant to communicate at all and make the first um, shows of communication about certain things because they don't want to be that old version of themselves with someone that they really care about because they know that pushes counterparts away. And I do feel like masculine energies can hold space for feminines who are in more of that fight or flight way of interacting and needing that, but I find that that is a little bit of an animalistic view of relationship and not so much bringing into a more mature level. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, everybody does have different communication styles. I would say that it would be more appropriate to know if it feels peaceful in those modes of
Mhm.
conducting ourselves rather than if it feels unsettled.
Yeah, I'm talking about more, like, mature people
Yeah.
that are, like have matured to a certain degree where, like, you know what you want. It's like, some people, like, don't want to be, like, talking to their partner all the time. Some people wanna be, like, really tight and be, like, sharing a lot. So that's more what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I can hear what you're saying though, where it's like more coming from like a lack and a neediness. So I'm talking more about someone who's like done more inner work to know where they're at and be like, yeah, I really like having a really tight knit connection, or I like having a lot of space, or you know what I mean? And being there. However, I do hear what you're saying, where it can come from like a fear of like, I want to know everything's okay. I want you to be like a soother for me. Like that's like not necessarily the form of communication I'm speaking of. So
Yeah.
it's a good distinction to
Yeah.
speak to, because there's definitely a way that you can be approaching it from fear and lack and anxiety, or just from a place of like, I love this person and I love being connected throughout my day with them. And it's more like also being aware of like the filters we put on ourselves and then the conditions that we're putting on ourselves to think we need to be a certain, or like be a certain way to like make a match with this person. And it's more what I'm trying to convey is like that
Yeah.
when you're authentic, like you should be able to just be yourself and
Yeah.
not need to think like, how should I be? It should just be like, I can be myself and be authentic and real. You know what I mean? And then that person will be themselves. And there's a sense of peace and safety and a sense of just love that you can just be who you are. And even if it's messy, you can work through it as well. And like, you know, mirror to each other with love that it's it's okay, it's safe.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Do how often does that really happen without hiccups? Like
Well,
it's great.
there's gonna
That
be
sort of
hiccups for sure. I mean, that's like just part of it. That's why the more open and vulnerable you are in a relationship, every hiccup actually builds more safety in the container.
so
It's when we hide and try to keep things back and withhold, and we put all these conditions like, oh, I shouldn't show this part of myself because that's not sexy, or like it'll push them away. And it's like, show the part of yourself with maturity and love to this person, and if they push you away or reject you or don't want to be around you, then like that's a really good clue as to like the nature of the connection.
maybe, or the skill level or the experience, or, it's hard sometimes. I feel like a lot of my viewers are dealing with specifically, my viewership is like 83% female, according to the statistics. And so quite a few of them are in relationships with a masculine that has not been fully showing up. Maybe not because the love isn't there, but because of life circumstance or stage of life or different things going on. And there does seem to be patterns of the masculine energies not being emotionally available, or um, it's been a while since I've seen these patterns, but things like blocking or ghosting or running, or just taking space when things aren't flowing but not communicating, but
Mhm.
the love is there on a deep level, and that this sort of action speaking louder than words and sort of shutting down and not knowing how to communicate. So I'm curious with men's work in groups, with being that many of the men come in through recommendations for doing more work and that from their partners. um, what kinds of things are being talked about as far as communication skills or being emotionally available? What what think tank things are supporting men to show up in that place and communicate more?
Um,
Is that something that you
well, a couple of things. One is like, if a woman has an emotionally unavailable man, it's like she needs to look at herself and look at like what in her is resonating with that and attracting herself to that. Same with a man if he's resonating with a woman that's emotionally, like a lot of men struggle with women who can be emotionally dysregulated or even volatile. There can be a lot of strong emotional projection that a woman can put on a man that can be very hard for men. And then it can be, but it's like you're not going to blame the woman. Like, it's like she has her stuff she needs to work through, but like what part of you has attracted that into your life? So it's like we always need to look at where the resonance is because if not, we just end up projecting and blaming the other person and saying like, "Oh, if only this person was different, I would have." Men are always so emotionally unavailable. It's like, well, no, some men are, and some women are too. And like it's just a human thing. It's a maturity level, and what part of you is still at a immature emotional frequency that you're attracting an emotionally unavailable man? Because when you're emotionally mature, it's like you just wouldn't wanna be around that. It's like, that's just unattractive. It's just like, I respect myself enough that I want a man who's gonna love me, and show
Mhm.
respect to me emotionally. And
Sometimes I think it's a label that's get put on men as well, that they're not actually emotionally unavailable, that
Mhm,
sometimes there's a lack of accountability from the feminine that um, they're not seeing cause and effect, why that man might shut down or that
mhm,
masculine might shut down because they're not, let's see. The feminine might not be taking accountability with how they're coming across. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah,
And getting a specific response. And it might be because the masculine is so emotionally tuned in that they know they don't want to go there with that feminine.
mhm.
Right. And it gets so, I guess to clarify
And
my
it
question. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was gonna say it's also, like, the emotional attachment, because sometimes there can be these strong emotional attachments, which is kind of the polar opposite of emotionally unavailable. Right? Is like a really strong emotional attachment to like a certain outcome or a certain way of being, and like really wanting someone to be a certain way
Mhm.
actually is often rooted in a lack and a judgment that causes that other person to
Mm,
then get stuck as well, and they're resonating at the emotional unavailable, and it creates this because it's not always like so black and white. It can be these dynamics that are polarized that are the same energy, but they're hard to track because they're
yeah.
actually so different. So it's like, how am I emotionally unavailable? It's like maybe you're not emotionally unavailable. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's like you're trying to get too much from this person, or there's like a neediness or like a strong emotional attachment to a certain outcome or a certain way of being, or the relationship being a certain way, rather than lovingly and compassionately being present to the person, which actually lifts them up and lifts their energy up. And then they can become more of who they are or not. And then you just lovingly and compassionately let them go because they're not meeting you in the way that you need to have a fulfilling life. That said, like with the men's work in that, what we really encourage of men is like to take the lead because the masculine role in relationship is to take leadership. However, you have to also allow the woman's energy to guide you in that. So it's not just like I'm the dominant man and I'm leading and you're going to do what I say. You have to, in any container with a woman, allowing her energy to kind of guide you to be like, what is her frequency right now, or what's her energy, and how can that guide me as a competent leader. And so what we encourage is leadership for men to like be like, hey, like there's this problem in the connection, or there's this charge, like let's talk about it, or I have a charge, do you have space to process with me, and to create an intentional container. And rather than just like having it be random, where it's just
Mhm,
like spoken about at a time where neither person is actually centered in their heart.
mhm.
Instead, like creating an first, like getting clear in ourselves, like what are we struggling with, where is our charge,
Yeah, that's
you
what I
know
was gonna say too.
and
Is
and then bringing that in a container where it's like, hey, let's sit and feel safe. Like let's create a container first of all that feels safe. So maybe it's like creating a ceremonial setting, or like sitting beside each other, or however you could cultivate safety with your partner. Everyone has their own way. And creating an environment that's loving, and then saying, I have a charge that I need to process with you. Are you open and available right now to receive that? And the charge processing is not, well, you do this and you do that. And it's really annoying me because I just want to be peaceful. It's like, no, it's like I feel a charge because, and it's always from the I as much as possible. And then allowing that to land and receiving feedback, communication. And often when we create a safe environment that's not about blame or projection, then the feminine can feel safe to soften and release, and then she can also feel safe enough to take responsibility for what's hers. And it's not always a smooth go. Like, it can be intense. That's why the more we can process our own charge, the better, which is one way that men's groups are great, because you can bring your charge to the men's group and be like, man, I'm
Mhm.
really struggling here. And then we think tank it, support the man to like get clarity, and then he can come with clarity, so that he brings clarity, not confusion. And then he has less charge. So then if she still has charge, he can hold it without reacting. And then she can often soften and release whatever charge she has and allow maybe some emotions to flow. And then there can actually be a resolution and
Mhm.
perhaps an agreement made for future moments, or just a resolution. And then having some kind of bonding after that, because now you've released charge, you've brought some healing, and now you want to create an intimacy. So it could be love making in a way that's really respectful, or like loving, not just like, fuck it out, but like, have like a connection that's like, oh, we've worked through it, now let's like work with this beautiful charged energy in a way that's wonderful. Or it can be like a massage or something, laugh together, have fun, like something that reminds you of the love that you share with that person, not the negative. And that's what we encourage, is first taking as much accountability, responsibility, and get as much clarity, and then bring that in a mature way that's safe, and then build trust as a result of it, and as much as possible to reveal one's inner world.
Mhm.
That's really what builds trust too, is like no one knows what's going on inside of you. What's happening inside of you is a secret place.
That's what's
And it's
coming up for me when communicating about sensitive things is something really impressed upon me when I heard it. And it is one sentence that says, ask questions for understanding, not through judgment. So
Mhm.
when we have those preconceived notions and we're like looking for validation with what we assume to be true, accusations or telling someone else's story, where everybody gets put on the spot and feels defensive when somebody else has this idea that they think is right about the situation without first asking for
Mm.
valid perspective from the other person. So like, yeah, that's a really
Mhm.
handy one. Ask for
Totally.
this,
Yeah.
not through judgment.
Like, I recently had an experience that, like, I won't share about in explicit detail, because it doesn't feel like my place to talk about it, because it involves someone else who's not present. However, I had basically a charge with someone because of a certain behavior that he was expressing when I was around him. And for me, it was very obvious this energy was not respectful, or at least I felt disrespected by the energy. And it felt, and I perceived it as disrespectful energy. And to me, it seemed very clear, and I was like, "I need to talk to him about it because I'm gonna see him again and I wanna clear it." And when I prayed into it, Spirit was like, "Yeah, just come with a lot of love and compassion, and, like, you don't know what his experience is, so all you can share is your own." So I sent him a message and just said, "This was my experience. I felt some disrespect. I have love and compassion for you. I'm not trying to blame you, and I wanna hear, like, what was your experience?" And he said, "I had," like, he was like, "Oh, wow, I really feel what you say. Is like, I can feel the truth of what you're saying. However, that I wasn't experiencing that. It was completely subconscious for me. It was like completely a blind spot. And it wasn't like an intentional thing." So we don't have to come with some intense, like, call someone out and like make them feel this, or like create like a trigger in them. We can just lovingly be like, "This was my experience." And then you can see how they respond. 'Cause
Yes.
some people will say, like, just put it back on you and project it
Right.
onto you, and then you're like, "Okay, this person is very emotionally, like, unavailable, and they're not fully mature in their ability to take
Mm.
responsibility. So I'm gonna take, like, 3 steps back from this connection and probably, like, not really want to be around this person because I value
Mm.
people who are willing to be fully responsible to the best of their ability. And, it went really well and it was well received. And I felt good about it because I spoke my truth in a way that was loving and also allowed me to release any stories. And then it just had me in a place of compassion because I've had so
Yeah.
many moments where I've been out of integrity in my life and I didn't even know it. I was completely ignorant to it. It was
Yeah.
a complete blind spot, and it wasn't until, a circumstance or a person reflected it where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I can see that." It's like, "Thank you for having a difficult conversation with me."
Yeah,
So
I have the flip side of that. I've had it where somebody, I won't go into details either,
mm,
but where somebody has said something that was accusational and coming from hurt. And when we're in our own wholeness and our own grounding, when that comes at us, we know it's not ours. We don't have to take it on, and we can have compassion when it's coming at us, so to speak, through judgment or whatever. And in that moment, everybody's human, everybody has their shortcomings and blind spots and places where they can go towards the infinite light. Like
mhm,
we're infinite beings, right? So we, as long as we're in human form, we're going to have those moments. And so
mhm,
just compassion. But when this individual brought something towards me because I had nothing but love for them, it was really easy to see that that wasn't an accurate read of my actions or my intention. And I was really able to stay in that truth and not react and not feel attacked, not take it personally, just have compassion that that person has had those experiences that would precondition them to respond that way, and that I got to be a different experience and to show like a really heartfelt alternative perspective. That feels super good too when
mhm,
we're in our own truth and we get to dispel those fireballs in those moments, and that real healing can come in, right? I have heard it kind of bubbling out on my YouTube comments and things recently about, like, maybe like people shouldn't give people like that a second chance, or but everybody's learning, and as long as it's not abusive, if somebody's freaking out and hurt and they feel distraught because they're misinterpreting something from their perspective, and we can bring more love to it, and they're not like actively doing harm or whatnot, and they just need a little bit of love and compassion to see it in a different way for the first time. Maybe they've never had something play out that way. And as we all become more loving, we're going to encounter those who haven't found as much love as we've had. And we can have so much compassion. I was listening to the Tao Te Ching the night before, and I had it fresh on my mind to respond to one comment that said, "The softest things overcome the hardest things."
mhm,
That soft heart and that compassion. And sometimes that's what is required. So I love that you shared a story about approaching a misunderstanding with compassion. And then I got to share a story about receiving a misunderstanding with compassion, because you can do it on both sides. you
yeah,
know? Yeah. And it's
totally.
being love and
Mm,
holding our own in all relationships, romantic or otherwise. I know we're not having time in this episode, but I really want to get into intimate connection on another episode, and how that all works. And you touched on having that trust building through intimacy with what you just shared in romantic relationships. And I think that's really important as a distinction too, to come to a real clear understanding within the individual's selves, and then together. um, I think it's important to do that prior to intimacy, so that intimacy doesn't become avoidance of that communication and that clarity too. I mean, it can happen in all different ways, but
mhm,
I like how you worded that about it being something that builds the trust after finding that clarity, just to ground
mhm.
the love in. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, and
Mm.
like for me, intimacy is really about allowing someone into our inner world, which can be sexual. However, it's also emotional and mental to a certain degree. Um, so in that it's like allowing someone into yourself is revealing yourself and allowing someone to see yourself and revealing it in a way that's mature and grounded. And it doesn't mean you have to just tell someone everything about you all the time. It's just like speaking to what's truthful and alive within yourself. And yeah, being transparent and honest as much as we can. And that's what builds intimacy in other aspects too, because it builds trust. And trust and safety are so interwoven.
Mhm.
And this is where like having the capacity for mature emotional communication is a skill that we want to build throughout our lives. And it's something that we want to practice with everyone as much as we can,
Mhm.
not just our partners.
No, exactly.
And
Across the
there's yeah, and there's like a growing culture of it too.
I know it. I think it starts with connection to source, right? If we
Mhm,
can have that healthy connection to source and really have that primary connection with ourselves, right? It's unconditional self
mhm,
love so that we can give ourselves the encouragement, the benefit of the doubt. We're all learning. And what did I see a meme like? Oh, I can't even put it into words, but when we put our foot in our mouth or something and how we have that like repeat flashback to that moment of embarrassment or
mhm,
whatever. Like we all need to like give ourselves a break and not kind of go into the guilt shame about it. We have to
mhm,
remember that we're all learning at all times. I think
mhm,
compassion. Yeah, did you have anything else coming up on your mind? We've got a few minutes left before 5:30 today and
mhm. Yeah, I suppose one thing is like the intentional containers for processing are really helpful because it's like revealing your inner world needs to be done with grace and skill. Like it's not like, oh, I'm super pissed right now, so I'm just gonna like
right.
share all my anger or
No.
like,
Is
it's
that the
like
deepest truth? Probably
yeah.
not.
It's like we want to and it's like if we're really charged in a moment and it's like,
Mhm.
"Whoa, I can't sleep tonight with this charge," or like, "This needs to be addressed right now," to also, like, have the maturity to ask for what you need and also be willing to respect the no of the other if that's what's alive for them, or to be able to hold it and process it yourself enough to, like, wait until
Exactly.
the moment where it's like, "Oh, like, well, we're, like, eating dinner right now, like, and I have other things I need to do, like, maybe now is not the time to process this, like, how about in an hour?" It's like, okay, like, being able to hold it long enough to then sit in deeper presence where it can be honored and our
Mhm.
feelings can actually be heard and seen in a more loving way.
I think in a perfect world, we celebrate the personal triumphs and victories with understanding the truth that sets us free on any of these things. If relationship to me, this is where I go with the ideal is two people who can bring everything to source and find the truth that sets them free in anything that's imbalanced. They know how to bring themselves back to peace with source. And then they get to celebrate that in communication instead of hashing it out or demanding something from the other person to make it better, whether it's closure or the truth or whatever that is, that each individual can drop in, find the essence of what is being the missing piece, and then eureka, eureka, and then sharing those triumph stories. I think that would be just such a beautiful goal to have in
Mhm,
sacred relationship, right? Why don't we take one question
mhm.
from people before we sign off here?
Yeah.
Does anybody have a question about anything that's come up yet? I hear keyboards going on.
There was one that said, "Would you recommend women ask men if they have space to help them process their emotions?" And I'm
Oh,
curious,
yeah, let's take that one.
what do you feel with that, Meredith, as a
I
woman?
Yeah. Um, I think it's really interesting because it is valid that our partners know how we are navigating things. If we are having genuine trouble or we are celebrating things, I do feel there are appropriate ways to express that we are feeling vulnerable or missing information. I think it's essential. I think part of the feminine polarity is the emotions and the sensitivity to the emotions. I think it's very important for feminines to get in touch with their emotions and not be reactive and really understand fear versus love drivers. But when there's something that has to do with the dynamic or the interpersonal relationship that's a truth that the feminine wants to bring up, I think there are some appropriate ways. One of the modeling that I've seen is that the feminine say, uh, tune in with what emotion they're feeling and ask the partner, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" And then if the partner says, "Yes, it's a good time," "Yeah, let's talk." Say, "I'm feeling da 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 da." Like, know what the emotion is. So there's no guesswork. Like, that person has figured out what that emotion is. And then the partner saying, "What's going on that you're feeling that emotion?" And then the feminine saying, I'm telling myself a story that da 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 da, owning the storyline, the narrative that's causing that emotion, and then posing that in that way, then the masculine can say, "Oh, I can definitely see how um, you'd be interpreting what's going on that way. You're right. I was um, approaching this in such a way, whatever." Or "Oh, my darling, no, that's not what was going on for me. This is what it was. I'm so sorry you're feeling that way." If it's done in that kind of a format, it's really nice because it's, approaching, not that we're having to say, "Oh, high and mighty, may I talk to you?" It's not that. It's like appropriate timing. And then what is the deepest emotion that we're bringing there? And then what is the narrative that is causing that emotion to arise? And if anybody brings that to a counterpart, I feel like where could we go wrong with approaching any of those
Mhm.
topics? What do you think of that strategy?
Yeah, I like that because it takes ownership and responsibility for it, and so often our emotions can be triggered by an external experience, and then through that trigger, there's a projection, and
Yeah,
it's like that projection creates defensiveness, whether that person was out of integrity or not. Like
yeah,
they're not actually responsible for how you feel. You're responsible for your
right,
feelings. So, we're responsible for our impact and how we show up and all that. However, I'm not responsible for how you feel. You're responsible for how you feel.
yeah.
And that's like a really deep thing to understand that I
That takes
continue to
discipline and a
yeah.
lot of focus. I think that is the most important thing for successful relationship is people who understand how much of an inside job it really is.
Yeah.
I think those labels avoidant, dismissive get some bad rap at certain times too, because I think internal processing is so vital. And, a lot of times people who are more anxious or whatnot, um, could take a page out of figuring
Mhm.
out how to self-soothe and drop into that mode
Yeah.
as well. It's so complex and it's
The other
mindful.
thing I would just real quick to add
Uh,
to that would be getting clear on what you need as well. So it's like when bringing for men and women, when bringing something, it's like men, we naturally have a desire to fix because that's part of how the masculine energy works, whether it's like fixing a car or like fixing a problem. So often the masculine mind is like, oh, I need to help. Like, you need help with this. Like, how can I fix it? And like, maybe that's a man who's like trying to fix you or trying to be like, oh, how do I need to fix myself so you don't feel this way? But it's like, often we just need presence and love. However, sometimes there's like deep emotional things that like, I actually am confused and like need help.
Mhm.
coming to deeper healing with this so knowing what you need in it and knowing how to ask for that is really helpful for men. And that's something to establish also outside of the conversation, like when you're not charged or triggered, to be like, yeah, when I share my emotions with you, what's really helpful is for you to actually just be really present and loving and even like take my hand or give me a hug or
Mhm.
maybe not. I need space. Don't touch me. Or whatever it is, like everyone's different. And then men are like, oh, I have like a sense of how I can show up that's loving and supportive. And the other thing is like discerning, like, okay, you need help processing your emotions. Is it about the relationship or something outside of it? And you don't want to bring too much of your emotional problems to your partner because then the relationship just becomes like a counseling and it
Mm.
can create more, it can kind of kill the polarity dynamic. Whereas like that's where it's good to have girlfriends or guy friends or whoever, whether you're man or woman, where you can like a men's circle, women's
Or
circle, where
connection to source.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, connection to source,
Yeah.
definitely. Connection to source and support from humans, both
Yeah.
are important to be able to process those emotions about whatever else is happening in your life. Um,
Fear
yeah.
versus love, though, right? Because emotional problems really are just unchecked fears or
Mhm,
unresolved fears. And
mhm,
so there's not going to be any rhyme or reason. It's illusion, right? When there's fear, there's a lack of clarity, and we can chase its tail all day long, and it's not going to be productive in communication with a partner or going around with that kind of logic internally. And so when we're spiraling, when we're going off of a fear-based thing, one of the most fundamental things we can do is stop and say, is this fear-based or love-based?
mhm.
I
Yeah.
remember my great uncle, his rule of thumb in the big family was don't tattle on anyone if it gets them into trouble, only if it gets them out of trouble.
Mm,
That for some reason that came to me just now about whether, communication. It's like, is it gonna get us out of trouble or is it gonna get us into more trouble?
mm,
That's the kind of
I
good
like
old
that.
fashioned rule of
That's a good one, actually.
yeah.
When apply yeah, because someone yeah, that's fun. I like that.
Yeah. Well,
Nice.
we sign off on that note?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Thank
Okay.
you so much. Really
Yeah.
wonderful to share with you today and share with everyone else who is watching this or seeing it live. And yeah, I would love to hear from everyone too, what their experiences are in
Yeah.
these realms and domains.
Absolutely. And I would also love if people comment after this live is over what kind of topics you'd like to hear us chat about going
Mhm.
forward. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really inspiring hearing other people's prompts and it gets us
Yeah.
considering too. So yeah, would
Yeah.
love to hear that.
All right. Much love, everyone. And
Great.
bye for now.
See
All
you
right.
later.
Yeah.